Welcome to the CodCast. I'm Chris Stevens.
And I'm Matt Weaver.
All right, Matt, we put out an announcement on the federal government critical minerals incentive last week. And I thought we'd try a new initiative, which is the Quick Cod, where we just spend 5 minutes and we talk about a single item, something that matters to us and something where we've had questions asking what does it really mean. So the incentive came out last week as part of the budget. And obviously, we felt it important enough to put this out. So you wrote the announcement. What's your take on it? What do you think about this?
Without getting too far into the politics of the whole thing,
thank God for that. If you don't know Matt, he loves your politics, don't you? So
I have a bias, I admit.
He has a bias, and this camera only has a 6-hour battery life. So let's just focus on the critical minerals policy.
Without getting too deep into the politics behind it, it's part of the federal government's Future Made in Australia policy. And basically what it comes down to is a production tax credit that's worth 10% of relevant processing and refining costs for any critical minerals in your project.
Right.
And that's kicking off, I believe, in 2027, 28, and it's going to last for 10 years per project.
Right. So, I mean, I'm a feasibility specialist by background, and generally the perceived wisdom is you sell your first saleable product. This has led to Australia getting accusations of being a quarry, being heavily reliant on processes. Often the bottleneck, especially in critical minerals, say more than something like iron ore, is that processing, right? So this is a smart move.
Yeah. I mean, there's certainly an aspect of wanting Australia to go further downstream, do advanced manufacturing, which, high-end chemical processing is advanced manufacturing.
Yeah.
There's also an element of the geopolitics of it all.
Yeah.
The vast majority of concentrate refining for copper cobalt basically comes out of the DRC, goes to China, and is processed to final metal in China. Now, obviously, there's some tensions there in that China relationship with the rest of the world. And the Americans put together their Inflation Reduction Act, I think last year or the year before. And a big part of that was about onshoring manufacturing and critical minerals manufacture. They have something called the AMPTC, which is essentially the same as what our government's put in, a 10% credit for the production of critical minerals in the US.
Right.
So one of the reasons behind doing the Australian version is to stop all of that manufacturing going to America. It basically equalizes the playing field for both countries.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. And obviously there's been for years we've been talking about needing to have more of this downstream processing in Australia. There's a couple of factors to that. One is we have some incredible know-how in mineral processing, but the more we don't do it, the more that know-how disappears. So I think this is obviously, to my mind, an incredibly smart policy. 10% of downstream processing costs is pretty material, right? I mean, this is a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, the full detail hasn't been released. I don't think the legislation's been written.
Yeah.
And defining exactly what counts as a relevant cost will be part of that process. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, we spend in our model a reasonable amount on processing and going downstream. It's always been the plan for Elizabeth Creek to go all the way to a battery grade cobalt sulfate. And, one of the challenges in doing that is that it's expensive to do here, and this is going to make it that much easier.
That's fantastic. So obviously, likely subject to the legislation, have a positive impact on both our plan to go downstream and ultimately final economics. And obviously that doesn't just apply to Coda, that applies right across the industry, right? We're not just talking about the impact on Coda. How much money has been put aside for this? I seem to remember it being a pretty serious amount.
Yeah, they've said $7 billion over 10 years.
$7 billion?
Yeah.
Okay.
So a pretty significant amount. When you take into account, that means something like $70 billion worth of expenditure on critical minerals downstream processing over 10 years. It suggests the scale of the industry that the government wants to create and support.
Yeah. And I mean, in the grand scheme of things, that's a lot of money. But I mean, it's about 8 times what's getting put into Arafura in the Northern Territory. And again, compared to the capexes of some of the larger lithium processing, this is relatively small. But especially for smaller companies looking to go downstream, this has got to be another very compelling reason to do that, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. As I said before, it's about equalizing the playing field between Australia and other countries, and it takes projects like ours where going downstream just makes a lot of economic sense and just cranks that up a little bit more.
Yeah, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
You said economic sense. I mean, without talking too much to Coda, but in general, going downstream, I mean, that gives you obviously that increases some elements of the complexity and size of the project. But in return, what does it give you? I mean, you get marketing certainty.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about TCRCs varying. You don't have
So
to worry
those are
about shipping.
treatment charges and refining charges,
Yeah.
which is the amount you pay to the refinery for them actually treating your product, right?
Yeah, what you pay to get your concentrate processed at a facility.
Yeah, so if you see $10,000 a ton copper, if you're paying 10% TCRCs, you're paying $1,000 a ton effectively of the copper that's coming out of that smelter.
I mean, that would be very high, but yeah, it's
Yeah. What are they usually? You remember?
Was very low at the moment.
Yeah. Actually, they went negative, didn't they?
Briefly.
They were paying companies to take and treat their stuff. Why would they do that? I mean, that's crazy.
It's all part of the copper shortage, frankly. The shortage is really starting at the mine face. It's not a problem with downstream processing. In fact, because production has dropped off quite a lot in the last few years, there's actually an oversupply of that middle phase of the processing and the smelting capacity in China. And because there's so much more demand for concentrate than there is supply, those TCRCs have come right down.
Yeah, and the thing with the refineries, you can't just turn it off. It's like, oh, we don't have copper today. We're just not going to produce any copper. Once these are big, complex pyrometallurgical processes. So once you're running, if you stop running or you have to change what's going into it with different concentrates, you're in real strife, aren't you?
Yeah, and the fact that those prices are coming down is another reason why the government's put this incentive in place. Because it does make it more tempting to find a way to sell your concentrate to the Chinese market. But with the 10% incentive, it brings it back to, let's go downstream locally.
Yeah. And again, that's got to be in the planning phase as well. You don't just bolt on a plant, do you? So, this Coda, for example, is at exactly that stage where this is important because we need that certainty of what we plan to do, and financiers need that, and people that fund these projects need that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, talking generally, I said this would be a quick COD, but when you and I start talking, it's never quick, is it? But we talked about copper, and obviously there's that shortage at the mine face, shortage of supply. I think we've said before on the podcast that most of the world's copper is produced by a handful of projects, which makes for an interesting supply curve. A couple of big ones slowing down, coming offline as well. Lithium. I mean, a lot of investors would be interested in lithium. That seems to be the opposite problem, doesn't it? There's an oversupply of concentrate, an oversupply of stuff coming out of rocks, but an undersupply of processing.
I mean, it's not an area I'm intimately familiar with, but I mean, you can look at things like the processing facility that's being built down in Kwinana, and it really shows that there is the capability to do that sort of thing here in Australia when there's demand, and whether that demand is being driven by market fundamentals or, getting a little bit of a push from some government support. It's really, demonstrating that we can do it here.
Yeah, and we really can do it here, and we should do it here. I think to my mind, it's really important that we keep these skills, we keep access to these final products, and we don't give away all our critical minerals knowledge.
Especially for cobalt. When you look at the global production of cobalt, the vast majority comes out of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and most of that gets shipped straight to China. Indonesia's coming up and producing some as well, but Australia generally only produces something like 5,000 tons per annum.
Yeah.
And then a project like Coda's can come along and put over 1,000, I think 1,300 tons per annum, and based on our latest scoping study, that's a pretty material amount of the Australian cobalt industry coming out and going all the way downstream.
Yeah.
Thanks in part to things like this tax credit.
Yeah, and I'll plug Coda for a second, but what's cool about it is it's nickel independent. It's linked to a much higher value, higher, rising commodity at the moment with a tighter supply profile, and it's relatively low capex. These nickel laterite projects producing cobalt, of which there are several in Western Australia, are generally north of 3-4 billion Aussie dollar capexes. These are huge.
And in a situation like we find ourselves in now with a depressed nickel price, you look down south at Ravensthorpe, that's not operating at the moment.
Yeah.
And so that cobalt has come off stream.
Yeah. So, I mean, in summary, then, we think this is a great policy.
Yeah, no, I'm very supportive.
I know it's your team, but it's a good policy. We need more details. We can't, obviously, as Coda, we can't model it up until we've got those details. But we believe overall it's positive for the industry. We're very supportive. It's going to mean money in the pockets of producers at the point that they need the money most. So it's either a rebate similar to the R&D tax incentive, or it's a rebate off the tax. I mean, ultimately what it means is it's more money earlier on in the production profile, right?
Yeah, it's basically if you're paying tax, that tax bill will be reduced. And if you're not paying tax, that comes back as a credit.
Yeah, which is golden at that point. I mean, when you run these financial models, every dollar early on is worth a lot more than a dollar later.
Absolutely.
Basic time value of money, but it really makes a difference to projects when you're getting when you're at the painful end of the Lassonde curve. Yeah. And so we think it's a great policy. It's obviously very positive for our country here in Australia. Should increase investment as well. So we wait keenly for more details.
For detail, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on the quick cod. Well, it's more of a medium cod today. We're going to get you back on again soon.
The oft-threatened metallurgy episode.
The metallurgy episode is coming. And Katrina, our senior analyst, is also, I think we've got her over the line on coming on as well.
Ah, good.
It's not just our ugly mugs that will be on here. So, look, thanks for coming on. And
thank you
again. Cheers.